Up next, we have Jeff Boele talking about developing the next generation of endurance athletes. Since 2000, Jeff has coached a wide variety of athletes ranging from middle school kids to adults. And while he specializes in the jumps and endurance world, he's pretty well versed in just about everything you need to know about cross country and track and field. Very passionate about learning everything there is to know about endurance sports and passing that on to the younger generation. And as Jeremy said, he currently coaches just down the road at Lyons High School. So, Jeff, if you would.
This is a lapel mic, so this is big time for me here. Make sure that works. All right. So thank you for coming. We'll get right into it. Whoa. I don't know. Maybe I'm too close to the other one here. Turn that guy off. No switch. It's okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'll get him to work.
Okay. We'll make do. We just turn it off. I think I can talk loud enough to all you guys. I talk over high school kids, so we'll be fine. Let's go with that. Let's just go with that. Maybe now with this. Okay. I promise you won't need to be versed in the psychology of suffering to get through this presentation. So you guys can learn about that. Later. Can everyone hear me? Does that work? Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. We'll figure that out. All right. I've got my notes up here, so I'm going to be working with this too. So I started going through my notes that I put together for the presentation, and I got to the end, and I realized that the concepts that I'm going to talk about, they're going to work for everybody. So maybe you work with youth, maybe you have adults. They're concepts that are going to cut across all populations. So don't feel like I got lost and I need to slip out of here. These are things that you're going to be able to use even if you don't work with youth athletes. If you're starting to work with youth athletes and currently work with them, again, they're things that are going to work for all populations. So I know that's what the title insinuates, but you're going to be okay. I got to remember to do two things. All right. So just so I have an idea of who I'm talking to. Who here works with youth athletes? And we'll call that 18 and under. Okay, so quite a few of us. Just about everybody. Who does that in an individual setting, like one-on-one? Who does that in a group or a team setting? So a mix, right? We've got some people that are doing it privately, one-on-one, and some people doing that. So again, things are going to work here. For all these populations. But I just kind of want to know, it takes an opportunity to direct that one way or another comes up. When I look at the folks that I work with, which is middle school and high school aged athletes, up at the school about 12 miles away, and then I work with a handful of adults through TrainingPeaks, age 30 to 55, I realize that I apply a really similar process to working with those athletes, whether they're brand new to the sport as an adult, brand new to the sport as a middle schooler. There's a process that I use that's pretty similar. Oh, cool. That might work too. Now I really have to jump. Okay. I got too many things in my hands. Now I'm really lost. Okay. So for me, the process of working with athletes, it's rooted in individuality, right? So as the funny little slide shows, are you working with clones or are you working with individuals? You need to identify who you're working with. So that's going to set up what you're doing. As coaches, we're always learning about our athletes, right? It's our job to take information that we get on a day-to-day basis and turn that into something that's meaningful and useful for the athletes. So whether that's in just working on things that are relationally based, working on things that deal with programming, we need to find out who we're working with. Even in a team setting, hopefully you're realizing you're coaching individuals and not just a big group. Everybody in that is going to be different. To just kind of put a little bit together and try to do a really quick example of that process, I have two athletes that I just pulled out that I'm currently working with. One is a 50-year-old male, and he wants to be faster for a trail race, right? Imogene Pass, which if you guys are from the state, you may know. It goes up a mountain, goes over a pass, and goes down the mountain. So Kirk, I just started working with him, so what do we know? You know, he's been running for almost 40 years. We agree that his uphill needs to be better. He can go down great. So he's been training for a long time. That's what we know about him. He doesn't need any more aerobic development. He's got 40 years worth of that. So when we sit there and look at it and determining that uphill is better, we want to increase force production. So right now, what's he doing to get ready for the race? He's doing workouts that are specific, ancillary training that's specific to increase force production to go uphill. So we looked at who he is, what does he need to do better, and how can we do that. I also have a 14-year-old girl, freshman in my program, brand new to the team. Family just moved from Texas. Before they moved up, I sent an email, tried to get some of this information. And so what do I find out? She's been running since 5th grade, and I put running in quotes there because she thinks she runs 6 to 8 miles a week. So whatever that running constitutes. So she sent me her track PRs, and then I said, well, what kind of workouts have you been doing? And she didn't know. So I say unknown history of training there. So there's a little bit of combo of known and unknown. She's new to altitude, coming from Texas. It's a brand new social setting for her. So with youth athletes, that's fairly important, that social aspect there. And again, because I don't really know, there's probably not a whole lot of previous training. So what do? We put her with the group of new athletes because we have other kids that are just starting running. It's a really conservative plan. So far in the 4 weeks that she's been with us, she's doing pretty well. So there's a good chance we're going to move her up into the group. She gets along well with her teammates, so I don't have to worry about animosity of changing her with the group. So again, who are you working with? It doesn't matter if that's a youth or someone who's a seasoned runner. You got to find out things about that person. What have they done? What do they want to do? What makes them tick? Those are the kind of questions that should have a large influence on your programming. And so now that I've mentioned programming, I need to throw out a warning. So I want to take a second and just talk about a concept here that may seem a little tangential, but again, I think it's important to note, particularly with youth athletes, but again, it's going to cut across all populations. So that warning is confirmation bias, right? Like the image says, it's hard to see at times. Who's familiar with that concept of confirmation bias? Okay, and it's okay if you're not. Basically, what confirmation bias is you search out evidence that supports you and basically don't pay attention to the things that would refute what you're saying. And it's a concept that I didn't know about for years, right? I just thought I was good. Like that's just where you are. It's maybe more accurate to say I didn't want to know that I could be wrong. So I think it's important to know that confirmation bias is there, and why do you need to be aware of that with youth athletes? So when you have folks that are relatively untrained, their capacity for improvement is going to be very big. And these folks can improve quickly as well. So what that gets you is this causation scenario. You give out the assignment, the athlete does it, they improve, and you know exactly what you're doing, right? That's probably the case, but it might not be the case. And again, this is going to apply with everybody. I have some older athletes, and they've hit some PRs, and so again, I pat myself on the back because I think I know exactly what I'm doing there, but we need to pay attention to this. With youth athletes in particular, if you keep them healthy, they're probably going to get better. So again, you just, confirmation bias, it's easy to run up against. And again, that's at least how it plays out for me. So I think it's important to know that that's a real thing. We want to believe that what we do matters, and it does, but we have to be willing to realize that maybe what we do matters in a negative way. We tend to elevate the things that we do well and say, yeah, I got that athlete to PR. But then when something bad happens, like an injury, we neglect that could be something that's related to what we do. So kind of identifying confirmation bias is essentially, as a coach, taking ownership in what you do. It's going to have an impact on what you do, and it's worth calling that out and realizing that, especially when it comes to programming or training, whatever your terminology there is. It's worth calling it out. It's worth noting that. Again, with programming, when it comes to athletes, that's the thing as coaches we have the most control over, right? We're asking them to do certain things. We can lead the horse to water, but we can't make it drink. Hey, go to bed, eat these kinds of foods. But, unless you're their parent, they're at home doing those things. But with the programming, when you're at practice, or even if you're in a private setting, they're paying you to do it, chances are they're going to do those things. So programming is what we have more control over with anything. And that's also where confirmation bias is going to show up. All right. So now that I've put some scare tactics in place, let's move on to some things that I think should be taught with youth athletes. So kind of a basic premise for how I think you should approach working with athletes in general, but especially youth, is you want to instill good habits. And I'm sure most of us have heard sport is a metaphor for life, and I'm sure a lot of people believe that. So this should just serve as reinforcement for that concept. But there's a lot of skills that we learn through athletics that will play out in real life, right? There's going to be some things that'll transfer a little bit less, but generally speaking, you're going to be able to find things that you do in athletics that are going to play out in real life. From a broad view, there's a lot of different topics here, and people are going to put a priority on certain things that, this will be good for life, and this will be good for life. So for me, I tried to select a few things that I think are overarching topics, and we'll talk on those. Another thing to consider as you're working with athletes, somewhere between 3.3 and 12.6 of high school athletes are going to go on to do that sport collegiately. So these are some numbers from the NCAA. So that's not a lot of people, 3.3 to 12.6%. So whether it's track and field, or whether it's football or baseball, not a lot of people are going to go do that at the next level. They may do it as a life skill, and it may be something that they do for fitness, or hopefully for us doing privately. They want to keep getting better, but the point is, not a lot of people are going to keep doing this. So it's probably a good thing if they have some things that they can use after we take all this time to impart a skill to them that they can use elsewhere in life. So what sets up good habits? First and foremost, as a coach, having a philosophy, right? What do you think is important, and why is that important to you? And I would suggest you keep it simple. It doesn't have to be a 30-page manifesto, but I would suggest that you write it down. Have a philosophy. Why do you believe what you believe? And have it something that you can reference. Culture. You need to establish a culture. The thing to point out here is it's going to happen no matter what. Whether you're passive or active with creating a culture, it's going to happen. So there are going to be relational dynamics, whether you do that in an individual setting, whether you do that remotely, whether you do that in a team setting. There's going to be something that athletes pick up. So if you don't demand certain things, if you don't have responsibilities and expectations, people are going to create a culture around what you demand or what you expect as a coach. So if you take an active role in doing that, I would want a positive a positive culture, so I would try to form that as a coach. And then the other thing, especially with youth, is you want them to enjoy what they're doing. And maybe some older athletes that have been at it for a while need to find the love again. But you want to foster enjoyment, and I think you want to do that in a way that's not veiled, right? You don't want to be disingenuine with that. So I call it fostering an enjoyment of reality, right? Training is rarely sexy in a sense that it's waking up, you're doing the same thing over and over again. Getting out the door for some people can be the hard part, getting out and doing it. But I think as a coach, it's important to foster enjoyment in the mundane, in the basics. If we're not doing that, if we're not imparting that on the athlete, that's the important part, they're missing out on the concept of success. It's not because they had some great workout that they killed and they did it one time in the season. That's what doesn't make them great. It's the ability to be consistent over and over and over again, doing the basics, mastering the basics. That's what's going to it's going to yield results if you can do the mundane well over and over again. All right, so let's get into some good habits. Reporting, journaling, logging. These are all things that are rooted in communication. So good habit number one, we need to have some basis for communication. What are things that we want to do with that? So let's unpack these things a little bit more. First one, reporting. I'm going to read directly from the slide here. Reporting is the accurate and honest recap of all the things an athlete is experiencing that may affect their training or competition performance, right? What are they doing? What are they telling you? Are they telling you about the injury? Are they telling you they felt like crap? Are they telling you they felt great? Reporting is the verbal communication that you have with an athlete. So with that, there needs to be some form of open communication back and forth. What are you doing to get that to happen? With reporting, it's something that oftentimes takes education. We've all worked with the athlete that's always, they're hiding in the bathroom or they're standing in the back of the group and they're trying to get out of the hard workout. And those athletes are going to happen at every level, and maybe more with the middle school kids that I work with because they're afraid of exposure. They're afraid of getting beat. And that's a whole nother aspect that we can talk about. But with this, for most athletes, the ones that are wanting to get after it, their biggest fear is getting shut down, right? They don't want to tell you about the little niggle because they're afraid you're going to pull them off the workout. So there's education that needs to happen. Maybe missing a day or a week gets them back to training quicker. But if they try to tough it out for 10 days or 2 weeks, that's going to end up, they're going to miss 6 weeks later on. So educating about reporting and them understanding that the changes that you make to their training will have a benefit long-term for them. So we need to have a long-term focus, not just a short one-day focus or one-week focus, and that's a hard thing to do. One thing that can help your educating process is, what are your plan B strategies? So if a kid comes to you and says, hey, coach, I think I'm hurt, and you just send that athlete home, or you give them some random task that has nothing to do or doesn't relate to what they would normally be doing, they're not going to put a lot of stock in your plan B workouts, and so they're going to be more hesitant to tell you that they have that because they're not finding value or relevancy in what they're doing. How are they going to still progress even though they're hurt? There's a big psychological aspect to injury there, and reporting and the way that you educate on that can benefit you long-term, can benefit your athletes long-term. For me, I rarely think that shutting an athlete down completely is the best thing to do. So for us, we're trying to figure out, how can we keep you going? How can we keep you moving through? If for no other reason, if you ask an athlete how they're doing, that shows that you have an invested interest in them. And I think kids in particular like that. If you just, go there, hand out the assignment, have the stopwatch out, and go home, you might get some results if you have this great programming. But if you take an invested interest in your athlete, So again, for no other reason, asking them how they're doing, chances are you're going to get better results. So reporting is the talking part of communication. Next thing we'll look at here, logging and journaling. And I think for a lot of people, they put these things together. I try to separate them a little bit. So with logging, with that, I'm talking about the actual hard data. What are you getting from your device? So whether that's pace, time, power, whatever that might be, that's the hard data that you're recording. Journaling is actually interacting with that. So you see that they did their 3-hour ride and they put out this much power, or they went on this run and it took them this long. And they said, man, that was the easiest thing I ever did, or that about killed me. The journaling is something, for me as a high school coach and a middle school coach, I don't have a lot of kids with anything besides like a standard watch, right? So they know they go on their run, it takes them this long. And so I put a premium on the journaling. How did they feel with what they did? What did they think with that? And then I'm trying to extrapolate and make sense of that. No device, no problem. Joe was up here talking about back in the day before the heart rate monitor, what did you have? RP, rate of perceived exertion. You can use a 1 to 10 scale, color coding, whatever it might be. If you're thinking about it and looking for it, there's ways that you can extrapolate data from what your athletes do. Sensory data, respiration rate, stride rate, how do those things work together? Just having your athletes pay attention to those things. You don't need a watch or a power monitor or something fancy to do that. The route an athlete chooses could give you information. Maybe you assign an easy route and your kid always rides or runs the same route. Well, one day on an easy route, on an easy day, they do a different route. Why did they do that? It presents an opportunity for you to ask a question. Maybe they actually felt good, so they chose the hilly route that day. Again, you can create data or find data that you can use. So, why do we want to? Why do we want to record things? Collecting and analyzing data tends to be objective. Not always, but if we're trying to avoid confirmation bias, kind of the warning there at the beginning, if we have ways to be more objective and we take some ownership in what we're doing, data is a good way to find that. Another thing that recording can do is it can set up the creation of KPIs, or key performance indicators, or in some cases, key performance inhibitors. So if you're recording or paying attention to what your athlete does over time, you can see these things, you can see these trends that take place, and maybe when an athlete does X, Y, and Z, you can kind of say, oh, their performance is going to be here. So if an athlete's not reporting, if you're not logging things, that information just kind of goes. Was it Joe or Dirk was saying that they would get their information during their ride or during their run and not do anything with it afterwards? Well, having a KPI, a way to identify what might be performance readiness or non-performance readiness, you have some things if you're paying attention. And another thing, it's a good habit, right? A life skill. Paying attention and communicating, that's something that's going to be valuable in life and not just in athletics. All right, so that was good habit number 1. Good habit number 2, self-care. We could go around the room and we could add to this list probably tenfold. Everybody here could come up with 4 more things than the 4 that I came up with. And these are things that I tend to put a premium on in my programs. So self-care, sleep, nutrition, hydration, body maintenance, self-therapy, mental and emotional awareness. These are all things that have a direct correlation to performance. And I think as a coach, it's important to spend time learning about these things, maybe more time learning about these things than it is, going out and finding out why max VO2 maybe isn't valued as much anymore, or why certain things about lactate are good or bad or are things to pay attention to. So these are things, again, they're going to directly correlate to performance, and I think they're worth paying attention to. Jerry, he's a therapist that works with Seattle Seahawks with a bevy of Olympic speed power athletes, and he was recently with the Women's World Cup team for Canada. His quote is, if athletes nailed sleep, hydration, and nutrition, most of us would be out of a job. And he's talking about, not coaches, he's talking about therapists. So if athletes dialed those things in, they'd be pretty good, and then they'd be able to do the plan that you throw out there to them, right? And that's what we're going for. We want to improve people. But our reality is most athletes don't nail those things, especially on the youth side, because they think they're impervious to pain, injury, all those things, right? They're going to go run through a brick wall, and they're going to be fine. So it's worth it to educate about self-care and what that is. At its core, self-care aims to reduce the chances of injury, or if you do get injured, it's there to try to get you back to performing quicker or back to being healthier quicker. So for me, again, there's a lot of things that can go into that. These are a few of the things that I put a premium on. Injury is going to happen, right? It's an unfortunate part of training. And maybe it doesn't happen a lot, but it's going to happen. It's stressful for the athletes. It's stressful for the coach. So what are we doing to try to reduce the gap between training? Healthy athlete gets injured, healthy again. That's the gap, right? What are we doing to try to shrink that down? And again, self-care is working on those things. For myself, I've tried to take injury and put it in a framework of it's an opportunity to learn. I talked about Plan B workouts, Plan C workouts. What are you giving the athlete when they're hurt? For me, I coach runners, so I don't do swimming, I don't do cycling. So for me, someone gets hurt, maybe we go to the elliptigo, maybe we go to the bike, maybe we go to the pool, and they had a 50-minute assignment or an 8-mile assignment, whatever it was. Can we change that, and can we make that mimic the actual assignment for the day? Can they do everything that we had scheduled on the ancillary side of things? What can we do on a daily basis to get them as close to what we had assigned as possible? So that's your Plan B. Does it have value? Can the athletes find value in what they're doing? Or are you just sending them away? The framework that I work from is if we can reduce those gaps on a daily basis, if we can make the assignment of the Plan B as close to what we had intended, we're going to keep that gap small and going on. So, if you know a few things as a coach, if you're taking some time as a coach to learn some things that you can impart to your athlete, you're going to help them in that process of getting back to doing what they want to do. So I just have my silly smoking doctor up there, right? If you know some things as a coach, maybe with self-therapy, for example, and you can assign that to the athlete, maybe they don't have to go see the guy that just went to school for a long time but has no invested interest in your team. I think it's important from a therapy standpoint to have some people in your corner that understand your sport and value your opinion as a coach, value your athlete's opinion. You see that person all the time. The athlete knows themselves. The doctor probably doesn't see that person very often. So if someone's willing to take your input and you have a little background or can teach yourself something, maybe you can hasten the ability to get back to going again. So, and again, if an athlete knows how to take care of themselves, good eating habits, good exercise habits, those are things that are going to play out longer in life than if they're just doing a sport. So good habit number 3, mindfulness. I look at this as the tie that binds. So in and of itself, being mindful or being engaged in what you're doing is a good thing, but this is a habit that you can take to those other areas. You can be mindful in self-care. You can pay attention to what you're doing. So if you have the ability to be mindful, engage, to pay attention to the task at hand, the chance of being successful in that task is going to go up. dramatically. And that can be difficult with youth because the attention span is about this big, but like anything, it takes practice, right? There's going to be repetition involved. So another thing that being mindful does is it creates process-oriented athletes instead of outcome-oriented athletes. And basically what that does is you're focusing on how you get to the goal instead of just the goal. And again, that's something that's going to be good for all athletes. One of the adults that I work with, she was very concerned about her time goal, and we were 20 weeks away from the race. So her emails, her logging, it was very concerned about, will I be able to reach this goal? Will I be able to reach this goal? And my response was, we have a lot of time and a lot of things between there. Let's pay attention to what we're doing. For her, and like a lot of athletes, if you are outcome oriented, you tend to get very anxious about what you're doing. Am I going to get there? Am I going to get there? Well, as if you're focusing on the path, if you're focused on the process, you tend to put some of that anxiety down. And overall, I think that athletes that are outcome oriented tend to underperform because of the anxiety that they put on themselves before the race and during competition. As you're going through these things, I'll say, what do your ducks look like? Are they in a row, right? So I consider those habits, the things that you're trying to create, your philosophy, the culture, the habits that breeds. Those are your ducks, right? You have to have your ducks in a row before you can dial in the training. You could have the best exercise physiology degree in the world. And some of the other folks that are going to talk here, folks like Joe, they know exactly what they're doing in a lot of cases, or maybe they don't, and that's why they're good. They don't know. But they're well versed in a lot of things on the training, on the programming side of things. But if you don't have your ducks in a row, if you don't have a philosophy, if you don't have a good culture, if you're not working with good habits, all that great information is only going to take you so far. With youth athletes in particular, we talked about this idea that you can kind of do anything with them and they're going to improve. And I think in this case, that's a great thing. That gives you time as a coach to dial these things in, to really develop a philosophy, to help work out a culture with your athletes. Because they're going to get better, right? So if you take some time to get your habits taken care of, that frees up some time to get your training dialed in. All right. Okay. So now that I'm a little more comfortable on my soapbox up here talking to you guys, maybe we'll talk about training a little bit. Okay. All right. So from an athletic development standpoint, can you answer this question if an athlete asks you, why am I doing this? Right? If the athlete comes up to you and says, hey, coach, how come we did this run today? How come we did this ride today? How come we did this swim? How come we're doing that tomorrow? Can you answer that question? Do you know why you're doing what you're doing? Again, that kind of relates back to having a philosophy. This is a concept that became important to me as an athlete, and I drove my college coach nuts because I was always asking, why are we doing this? Well, that's not what I did in high school, and we had a good high school team, and I ran pretty well then. How come we're doing this? How come we're doing this? And then when I became a college coach, and I had athletes do that to me, and it drove me crazy. But I at least had a concept of why they were doing it because I was that guy on the other end there. If you don't have an answer to that question, you probably need to reconsider why you're doing something. And I also think this aspect of that's important. If someone asks you that question today and you give an answer, 10 years later you get the same question, I think it's okay to have a different answer. As the dude says, I got information, man. Certain things have come to light, right? If you learn something along the way, it's okay to change. We don't want to be anchored in something and fight that. As Joe was talking about, he's kind of a heretic in some circles. That's the great thing about research, and that's the frustrating thing about research, is you read something and you think you're down this path, and then 6 months later, a year later, the research tells you something else. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens. So as a coach, you got to be willing to accept that. But again, that's okay. Bottom line is, when this question is asked, you need to have an answer for it. All right. What characteristics do your training units or exercises have? For me, as I think about this concept more and more with the coaching that I do, I want my training units to be able to be progressed. At this point in my evolution as a coach, that's a basic tenet that I want to have. And what I mean by progressed is, in some cases, that might mean a partial movement to a whole movement. Like AJ said, I work with jumpers, and so there's certain things that we break down, and we work on one aspect of the jump for swim stroke or maybe pedal stroke, or even with running. There may be certain things that you spend some time doing a partial movement, but can you take that partial movement and make it look like the end result? General to specific activities and global to individualized activities. Can the exercises that you're doing, can they be progressed? Another way to look at some things is through generational organization. And a basic definition of that is, how closely does the exercise that you're doing resemble the final movement? And this was a concept that was presented to me by Dan Paff, a master coach with a lot of speed power folks. And when you get down to it, generational organization talks about specificity of training. You could spend some time doing planks, but do planks really resemble riding the bike? So how do you progress that? So when I look at generational training, the concept for me is, how much time do you want to spend on menu items that don't look like what you're doing, versus how much time you want to spend on menu items that do look like what you're doing. And menu items are just exercises or training units, if you're unfamiliar with that. So to give a little bit more on the concept of progressing through, I just threw a couple things together for a potential athlete that might be in a program for myself at the high school. So freshman comes in, and we run a 5K here in Colorado, and so we're going to have some running components, we're going to have some general strength, some mobility stuff, some high central nervous system demand workouts, we're going to have some weight training, and we're going to do some visualization and arousal techniques. So that's what they're going to do as a freshman. They're in the program. We go through senior year. Where are we in this? So they're going to still have running components, but we're progressing them. So there's probably going to be an adjustment, the volume and the frequency of the intensity that they've done. We're going to add individualized general strength circuits. We're going to add individualized mobility circuits, and we might combine them with general strength stuff for coordinative things. We're probably going to increase the frequency of high CNS stuff. In the weight room, we're going to diversify the sessions. Instead of things that are primarily bodybuilding or regenerative in nature, we may have things that are designed for absolute strength, maybe a premium on power development. We're going to increase the frequency of push or pull type lifts based on the individual. Maybe someone's a pusher, maybe someone's a puller. We want to play to their strengths at times, we want to play to their weaknesses at times. We're going to identify those things and adjust for that. And we're probably going to increase the amount of single and split leg stance that they do in the weight room. On the visualization and arousal stuff, we might move from third person to first person stuff. We're going to learn about this athlete, so we're going to implement specific strategies, and we might do less guided things. So they're going to take the reins on this and do it on their own. So at home, in practice, we might arrange times. And another thing we might do is change periodization schemes. We might move from a Yakovlev-based scheme that a lot of folks know with, a base, a build, and a peak, or a general to specific, and maybe we move to a block periodization scheme because that works, or maybe we do a transfer of training periodization scheme because that seems to work. It depends on the athlete. Again, we talked about it at the beginning. We're working with individuals. So this was kind of a hypothetical there to show what progression would mean over time. So so now we got to progress. So what does that mean? How do you know when to progress, right? It's never as easy as we think. We set up the plan, and it's never linear. Maybe a little more linear with youth athletes because they're going to improve no matter what. But again, this was the funny cartoon that I found. I was like, oh, that works pretty well. You want to follow the plan, but the plan's not always going to work. So how are we going to progress that? The quick answer is monitoring, paying attention to what the athletes do. With monitoring, I'm going to call that the coach side of communication. So the reporting, the journaling, the logging that your athletes do, when you pay attention to that and interact with that information, that's your monitoring there. That's the coach side. As we discussed earlier, the goal is to use that information to make informed choices for your athlete. With the youth athlete, you're going to have a little bit more of a crapshoot there. A study that I was reading a couple months ago, it talked about there's no real best method to monitor immature athletes. But what it concluded was if you pick a method and you use it over time, that's going to be a good thing. It's going to produce useful information for you. So one thing may be better for someone else, one thing may be better for somebody else here, but if you stick with it, you're going to get results. And that was talking specifically about dysfunction. And so when it comes to progressing an athlete through a menu item, we're not really paying attention to that, but the concept is the same in that if you pay attention over time, you're going to know when to move an athlete around. And again, that could be because you have KPIs set up, or there's that intuitive aspect that you just know. I'll go back to that. One of the things I think it's worth pointing out, we take a lot of time planning. How many of you guys, the majority of your time is maybe spent with the athlete, but then how many of you would say that the next amount of time you spend is actually coming up with what the athlete does? That's for me. So I spend a lot of time with them, and then I spend the next most amount of time coming up with it. But the warning here is don't get too emotionally attached to that plan that you just spent hours and hours and hours doing. I have a pretty good athlete up in Lyons, and he went to World Cross Country Championships this year, and I estimate that this summer I probably spent about 50 hours coming up with his programming for the next 6 months, and I get done with that, and I go, Jeff, it's not going to look anything like that when you're done with it. So for myself, I kind of take the step back at that point and go, well, I now have the basis to make adjustments from, but I can't get too emotionally attached to that plan that I wrote because the reality is we're not going to follow that straight line. We're not going to get there that way. But like I just said, I think the plan gives you this basis to make adjustments from. So if you have a concept of what you're doing and things don't go as planned because they look like that, now you have some basis to adjust from. So we've determined that monitoring is the best way to progress somebody, but monitoring is not always the easiest thing to do and to know that. So to try to give some concrete way, because there's no actual physical timeline, this is a flow chart that I have that can kind of help you know when to progress an athlete. And I think this works a little bit better for maybe a skill, like swim stroke. I don't coach swimming again, but I think folks would tell me that swimming is a swim stroke is a very skillful activity. So maybe an athlete can't quite get that. So this is a flow chart that might help you work through a skill activity, but I think it paints a pretty good picture of what you can kind of figure out to move an athlete through any kind of an exercise. So first thing you're going to do is, do they understand what you're asking them to do? And I have some athletes that when I give an assignment, it's like I'm talking to a wall. So I've identified those athletes, and I hand out the assignment to the athletes that I know get it first, and then we'll sit down, we'll have a little powwow, we'll spell it out, and then after their warm-up, they come back, and then we'll rehash that, right? So does he actually understand what you want them to do? And there's going to be various cues or strategies that you employ to try to get that to happen. The next step would be, are they actually capable of doing the task? And with youth athletes, I think this is where your biggest hang-up is going to be. And so I think a lot of athletes might spend a lot of time at step 2 because they may not be strong enough. They may not have the coordination or the range of motion to actually do an activity. So can you adapt that activity? Can you adapt the movement to get them to do that? If not, well, let's go look here. What's step 3? Is there really a dysfunction? Is medical intervention needed? Does a therapist need to get involved to kind of work them through that? And then when all else fails, film it, review it, go find the expert and ask that person. And maybe they'll catch something that was really basic and you feel kind of like an idiot because you didn't see that. But that's okay. I loved what Dirk was saying with the fail fast. I think so often as athletes, and especially as coaches, because we take so much time in training, we're really afraid to fail. I know for myself, I spend time and tons of time, and my wife would tell you, you spend way too much time doing these things, and because for me, that's born out of my fear of failure. But I think if we're okay with failing fast, I love that phrase, I'm going to steal that from Dirk, and we go through that and we learn, I think that's going to help us. So once you get down to the end, getting the second opinion, going to the expert, that helps us hasten that process. All right. Here we go. Are we done yet? I'll get down off the stage and let you guys get to some other speakers here. So to recap, when we think about coaching or working with youth athletes, and again, I think this is for anyone in general, but for youth specifically, you need to know who you're working with. You need to find out about that person. What do they want? What makes them tick? You need to be aware of confirmation bias and how that's going to have an effect on what you assign that person. For youth athletes, I think it's of the utmost importance to try to instill good habits. And the ones that I picked out were communication, self-care, and mindfulness. And again, you got to get those ducks in a row before you go tackle training. And I think you have a benefit of time there. Because youth athletes are going to improve with just about anything, good or bad, whatever that means, you have some time to dial in those other things. Know why you're doing what you assign. Have that answer. It may not be the best answer, but at least you have an answer and you have time to dial that in. And then once your athletes are doing something, pay attention to it. Don't just send them out to pasture doing whatever your plan is. Actually pay attention to that and be willing to adjust. And most of all, have fun with what you're doing. That's why we got into this, right? Maybe to win, but beat some people, but having fun, right? Having fun is why we got into this. If you're not having fun, your athlete's probably not going to be having fun, and then why are you doing this? Because as the folks talked about earlier, we're probably not making a lot of money in this yet. So if it's not enjoyable, why are you doing it? All right. Thanks for listening. Again, my name is Jeff Boele. And if you do have questions, feel free to email me. Like Joe said, he used to put the phone number up there. I put the email up there. I'll be hanging around all day at the lunch and at the social afterwards. So I think with these presentations, you try to take the things that go on in your head. And for me, my head's really busy. And you try to boil that down. And what can I do in 50 minutes? And so you end up putting a lot of things out there and not explaining them really well. So if something went up there and you're just utterly confused by it, and that may be the whole presentation, feel free to ask. I would rather sit around in the shop with Joe and talk about training. That's my favorite thing in the world to do after training is just sit around with people and talk about why we do X, Y, and Z and get those ideas and bounce those things off and have the arguments and have the agreements. So as fun as this is to get to talk and prepare these things, I'd rather just sit out in the crowd and chat with people.